Do you have a glass, Arnar?
Have a glass, yeah, very respectable white cup.
Very serious.
Hmm.
I was just saying, I think we should give it 2 or 3 more minutes so people have time to come in.
Of course.
Góðan daginn, hi.
Hi, hi.
Nice to see you both again.
Hi, Sonja.
Hi.
Nice to see you too.
Já, takk.
Oh, hi, Sonny.
Guys. Hi, Arnar.
I hope you will hear something new. You've just been listening to hours of me before Christmas.
Something new today.
Yeah, I hope you hear something new today
Yeah,
that you didn't hear
I hope too. I hope
in
too.
the course.
This is the reason why I joined.
Okay.
But also repeating is good to know, so no problem. It will be just nice start of the day.
Very good.
Okay, I think I just start and then people can still drop in. So, welcome everybody to this keynote webinar. My name is Magdalena Falta, even though it says Stefania on my Zoom account, but I'm using my colleague's account, so I'm still Magdalena. I'm a teacher and a researcher at Háskóli Íslands, and I'm a project manager at Einurd, who is hosting this webinar today. And before we get started with Arna and today's keynote speech, I would like to shortly introduce the Erasmus Plus project Extor, which is hosting and funding this keynote today. Simone just wrote in the chat that this QR code doesn't work, which is a pity, but I wrote the web page here in the left corner down there. So Extor is a joint project of 6 countries. Iceland is one of them, and it stands for Experiential Tourism for Sustainable Rural Development, and it has a lot of big goals like fostering rural innovation and fostering entrepreneurial skill sets in rural tourism. And we would just like to invite you to check out the webpage project, just the link in the left corner down there. There's a lot of material there on the topic. There's, for example, an e-learning platform where you can access a whole course program for fostering entrepreneurial skills. You can use that individually or embed it into your institution. It's free for everybody to use. Then there's a community platform that is called Diginrur, and there we invite you to sign up if you want to get all kinds of information in the future or heads up for events in that topic, rural innovation in tourism. We will record the session today, and if you would like to get the recording, then just send me a line and we are happy to share the recordings with you. But before we get started, I need to ask you for a little bit of help because I mentioned that this is an Erasmus Plus funded initiative today. And all of you that have worked with Erasmus Plus before probably know that this funding mechanism is quite strict, especially when it comes to proving evidence and proofs. So I would like to ask you to scan the QR code with whatever role you guys registered in the registration forms, a local authority, community member, vet provider, or vet learner. And that will lead you to a short Google Forms survey. And I'd just like to ask you to have this survey open during this keynote speech and then answer it in the end. And in order to be able to answer all of these questions, I need to ask you to additionally scan this QR code here below, chart of intent. I will quickly show you that will lead you. Stop sharing for a moment. That will lead you to a document which looks like that. which is a short, it's kind of a vision on how rural innovation should look like in Icelandic tourism. This is made by this project. And it's very short. So if usually there's just a few bullet points, so if you can somehow identify yourself with what is stated in this project, then it would be so great if you could just put your signature behind whatever role you can identify with and approve this chart of intents. I know that is quite specific, but only with your support it is possible for us to fulfill these strict requirements of Erasmus Plus and be able to host and offer free webinars like this one today. So thank you so much, and I will come back to this QR codes so you can scan it. Do you still see my screen or no, you can't? Wait. Now you can.
Magdalena, what was the sorry, I missed what does the VAT stand for again?
That's vocational education training.
Okay,
So that's
yeah.
basically just if you offer any kind of training that has to do with tourism, rural innovation or innovation, if you are like a teacher or offering courses or also just on the side, then you are a vet provider. And if you are a learner, that's when you just take these courses.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, but that's enough of organization. So if you can help me with that, that would be awesome. So let's get started with today's session, what we think about when we think about innovation. And I'm super happy to introduce our today's keynote speaker, Arnar Sigurdsson. Arnar is the founder of East of Moon, which is a laboratory for community-centered innovation labs, and he will share his thoughts with us on that topic. And over the past years, Arnar has spent a lot of time on exploring the dynamics of rural innovation in Icelandic ecosystems. And he did that from, I think I can say that, Arnar, from various angles, right? Arnar has been involved in building up innovation hubs, creativity hubs, both in rural areas, but also in Reykjavik. And he has explored the effects of having like a real understanding of these buzzwords that innovation and entrepreneurship are. Because recently these two concepts have just been around in public discussions, and not everybody who uses them always truly understand what they actually mean. And I had the pleasure myself to work together with Arnar in a 2-year project where we only thought about rural innovation ecosystems in Iceland, and that was very inspiring. So Arnar, welcome to this keynote speech today, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and thanks for being here today. And the floor is yours, and I look forward to just listening to you and hearing what you think about when you think about innovation. I'll stop sharing.
Well, thank you so much, Magdalena, and thank you to Arnar and the Extra Project for hosting me in this. I don't know if I will answer to you what the buzzwords truly mean, but maybe I will attempt to make it a little bit more complex. And what I really want to explore is what it means when we think of them in a certain way, and what are the consequences of how we think of them. So that's maybe more of something I'll attempt in a Thursday morning than to answer what they truly mean. You will have to figure that out for yourselves, I suppose. I will now show you some slides. And as Magdalena mentioned, I work with this innovation laboratory called East of Moon, where we study innovation and creativity from the point of view of communities. And in this session, we'll focus on rural communities. I had the pleasure, as Magdalena said, of working together with her on a project called Fostering Innovation Ecosystems in Rural Iceland. And this is a picture that we commissioned, which we called Hometown Moonshots, which was kind of an attempt to widen our imagination of what innovation in rural areas means and think about that kind of from different angles. And I'll be sharing with you some of the takeaways from that and some of the questions that I've been working with in terms of innovation. So the title of this talk, as you know, is What We Think of When We Think of Innovation. And again, I won't give you the true definitions and the true meanings, but I will give you hopefully a bit of a thought process of what are the consequences of how we think of these words. I'll let you hear a little bit about how the word innovation is used before we delve into it, just as a refresher. So,
as a world-leading hub for science and innovation.
See, I mean, Apple was a company that was based on innovation.
To another innovation, the digitalization of milk production.
China has overtaken the United States in several key innovative sectors.
Scale up innovation solutions and uses them in a bigger scale.
User-centered orientation, social innovation, data-driven policy and decision-making.
Innovative Solutions Canada. An innovative low-cost treatment plant.
So that you may go and change the world.
Innovation can happen anywhere.
So the first thing to note, if we look at how this word is used, is that it is almost always used in a value positive way. If I were to say that a particular country or a company or even a person is not very innovative, you would kind of assume that I'm talking badly of them. So we sort of assume that innovation is good and not innovation is therefore bad. There are almost no mainstream political parties that don't want to have more innovation. Every single region in Iceland and across Europe wants to have more innovation in their area. Every company is trying to be more innovative. So one of the consequences of this is that there is usually not so much of a discussion, a critical discussion of what we mean when we say innovation. And, you know, do we want to have more of it, and what kind of innovation do we want, and what do we think of when we think of innovation, going back to the title. So I am going to throw at you a bit of a controversial line, which I took from the Institute of Innovation and Public Purpose, which is an institute in London that really thinks very critically about innovation and society and the state, where we attended an event this summer, which is innovation is political. You would not think that beyond perhaps politicians saying we want more innovation, more unicorns, more growth, more startups, more innovation. And for a very good reason, I think saying that innovation is political puts us on edge and makes us a bit defensive. Does this mean that an innovation always has to be part of some sort of a strong ideology? Or does this mean that political parties should be deciding what gets innovated and in what direction does the innovation go? I think we're, for a very good reason, skeptical about trying to steer innovation from above, which is how we think of politics often. I think most creative people who have been part of making something new, where exploration and serendipity is a huge part of it, I think we're all, by our own nature, anarchists when it comes to innovation or art or creativity. We don't want it to be steered from anywhere. So I am not necessarily advocating for that when I join in on the slogan that innovation is political. What I am rather trying to emphasize is that if we do believe that innovation is creating the world of tomorrow, if we think that it has consequences for society, then to a large extent, how we approach innovation, how we support it, where we direct it to, has political consequences. And what I'll try to attempt to share with you or argue with you in the next few minutes is every single time when we talk about the innovation ecosystem and we make decisions about how we approach innovation, we're making political decisions, and there is no way around that. All right, so those of you have listened to me talk before about this topic, you might know that my favorite definition of innovation comes from the driest organization in the world called the International Standards Organization. They define innovation as a new or changed entity realizing or redistributing value. This is the ISO 56000:2025 standard, if you want to look it up. It's a fascinating read. Look it up, read it, read all the footnotes. It's a really good definition. And if there ever was a true definition of innovation, as Magdalena called for in the beginning, that this would be it. But I'd like to use this as a starting point for our conversation. So it's something that it's something new or changed that realizes or redistributes value. And so what do we think of when we think of new or changed entities realizing or redistributing value? What does this word mean for us? And what does it mean when we think that value means money, for example? This is a bit of a complicated topic. We often assume that the role of innovation is to create economic growth or money. Again, this is not necessarily something that is debated a lot of the time within the innovation ecosystem or within innovation circles. It's just something that's assumed. And obviously, we often measure value in money. We see economic growth as a proxy for value increasing. But we have many examples of companies creating a lot of economic growth, but not a lot of value. We see a big part of the technology ecosystem today being more of a rent extractor. The Amazon, the Meta, the Google are taking away value, but creating a lot of growth. So we cannot conflate those things. And secondly, we cannot assume that if there is no economic growth or money is not being exchanged, that no value is being created. Every single December, my daughter is so excited to see the big sculpture of the Christmas cat downtown Reykjavik. This is a sculpture that was put up, it was paid for, but then year after year it generates value in the form of public enjoyment where thousands of people walk past it and see it and enjoy it, and there is no money being exchanged. So if we assume that value means money, there are certain consequences. So what is value? What is valuable is a question that we don't necessarily ask ourselves in the context of innovation. One answer to this is that value is something that meets human needs. And so, one framing of this is this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Whether you see it like this pyramid or something else is a matter for psychologists, I suppose, and we won't go into that. But just to ground ourselves in the fact that whether the innovation we do is put on display for the public to see with exchanging money, or whether it generates economic growth, in the end of the day, the value should be about meeting human needs. And this forces us to talk about our values. What do we value? And so we create all kinds of resources and capital which are not necessarily economical, but might be cultural, symbolic, and social, which we should keep in mind. The second thing that happens when we think that about innovation and we think that new is a new thing, exploring how we think about innovation again.
What?
Somebody's mic is open. So is innovation a new thing? And I'm asking this to challenge us to think about innovation maybe in a more of a systematic way. In the 1970s, Kodak created a digital camera. And it didn't go very far. It wasn't very technologically advanced. Magdalena, are you taking care of the admitting people? Because it's popping up on my screen.
Yeah,
okay.
Somebody just came in.
So they created a new thing. It was a digital camera. It wasn't very usable. Part of why it wasn't very usable is because the underlying technology for digital cameras weren't very far ahead. So you could only take 5 pictures on it. It was very grainy and small, but they did make this thing. But let's imagine for a moment that they had made a perfectly technologically advanced digital camera back in the 70s, with all the most advanced functions, being able to take hundreds of pictures in high resolution. Would it have been a usable innovation? And the answer is it wouldn't. It's not possible to use a perfect thing of an innovation in the 70s with the society that is there. For there to be the innovation of a digital camera, there need to be certain social consequences, social circumstances. There needs to be the infrastructure of the internet to send the pictures from person to person. Everyone has to have a computer screen in their homes. Otherwise, what's the point of having the photos digitally? People will have to have adopted the habit of carrying around phones around them. So it's only when society has sort of created the circumstances for digital cameras that these inventions can become innovations. And often there needs to be certain cultural shifts, certain habits, certain infrastructure, either technological or social. There even needs to be sometimes changes to regulations and rules and laws and the way that we govern society in order for innovations to be possible. So I'm putting it like this to emphasize that innovation isn't a new thing. A new thing is an invention, but innovation is something that society in its whole adopts and creates. And this has very important consequences for rural areas, because rural areas often don't have all these different infrastructures, all these different conditions that allow for innovation to happen. And so often what innovation in rural areas consists of is finding ways of introducing something that isn't a new thing in the world, but finding ways to introducing that in the circumstances that they find themselves in. So just as innovation and discussion of innovation cannot be separated from what is valuable, at the same time, the discussion of what is innovative cannot be separated from the social context that it comes from. What does it mean when we think that the entrepreneur, the person who innovates, is a businessman? This is, again, often something that is assumed, not debated. The original definition of an entrepreneur from 200 years ago from Jean-Baptiste Say is someone who moves around economic resources, land or natural resources, labor, capital, who moves them around from something that's less productive to something that's more productive, moves it around from something that creates less value, meeting human needs, to something that creates meets more human needs. And if we part from this definition, and again, we rarely talk about definitions when we talk about entrepreneurship, then we have to conclude that the entrepreneur is not necessarily a businessman. The entrepreneur can be a government that can push the economy towards certain sectors or certain directions, like the so-called innovation government of the post-World War II in Iceland, which pushed Iceland's fishing industry into more productive and value-creating form. We also have to conclude that the entrepreneur can be a non-profit organization. Even something like the women's organizations of Iceland, which pushed economic resources collected them through whatever means they had to raise money and put them into health institutions or other kind of social benefit entities. These organizations were truly entrepreneurial in the sense, if we do look at the definition. So what does it mean if we think that the entrepreneur is a businessman only? Well, we are only seeing the top of the iceberg. What does it mean when we think that innovation should create jobs? In Icelandic countryside specifically, this is almost an obsession. The idea that we must be creating jobs is taken for granted, is part of every single policy document, even in areas where, on the whole, there is no unemployment to speak of. Obviously, there are examples in Icelandic countryside where locally there are economic disasters where a fish factory goes away or tourism changes and there is a huge need to create jobs. But on the whole, that is not always the case. So what does it mean if we think that the role of innovation is to create jobs? Well, it usually means that we are not doing innovation. Whether we like it or not, innovation is often in the business of reducing jobs. The automation that innovation introduces, like we saw in the fishing industry, where we have a fraction of the number of workers that produce the same amount of tons of fish in the last 20, 30 years. That is all due to innovation. That is due to innovation and in the technology, in the machines, but also remembering that innovation is always in a social context. That is also part of the change of the legislation, of the introducing of the quota system, the capitalization of that industry, and the concentration of wealth. And so if we think that innovation is not necessarily creating jobs, but taking them away, this opens up for us a conversation about, well, if we produce more with innovation, who is capturing the value from that? Which towns or regions are now having a booming fish industry? And what happens to the places that lost their livelihood because because of the processes of innovation? So it matters if we think about innovation as something that creates jobs, or more correctly, something that takes away jobs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing to take away jobs, but it invites us for a conversation of, well, what we make, the surplus that happens when we create more with less people, where does it go to? Who is the beneficiary and who is the loser of this? We think often of innovation as something that should solve local challenges. And this is coming from a good place, I think. I think the assumption is that, we should use innovation to help the people of Grundarfjörður figure out what are the challenges, what they have to do to make their lives better, and then use innovation to fix that. And that is not necessarily a bad thing to do. But a place like Grundarfjörður, a fishing village, was not born to create value through fishing for the people in Grundarfjörður to consume the fish. So a fishing village creates far more fish than anyone in that village can consume. So because we live in a global world, usually what innovation revolves around on a local level is communities figuring out a way not just to solve, to meet human needs there, but figuring out a way to create value or meet human needs which are global. So in the case of a fishing village, they will almost certainly sell the fish globally. They are meeting the need, the human need of somebody in Manchester who likes to eat fish and chips. when we engage in tourism, we are meeting the needs of a German bank clerk who wants to see something beautiful and exciting. So sometimes the frame of meeting local needs can be also limiting if we think of it like that. When we think that innovation should be based on local strengths, this is also something that gets thrown around without very much discussion. This is often associated with this here, which is the SWOT. The strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats. And what it sometimes does is it freezes us in our own definitions of ourselves. So by defining what are our strengths, we are often perpetuating our own self-image and our own myth of who we are, rather than breaking out of it. So if we think that innovation should be based on local strengths, often what we're doing is the opposite of innovation. We are simply moving forward with the same path that defined us in the past. And what we should be trying to do is we should be doing the reverse SWOT of trying to figure out a way to turn our weaknesses into strengths and strengths into weaknesses. And we can define opportunities and threats on a local level, but usually these are big global trends that we can't really do much about. So the only way to kind of react to them is to find a way to turn them into strengths. All right. This was an exploration of assumptions, an exploration of things that we say, which we can or cannot agree with, and all of them have their own merits, but to try to kind of challenge us about how we think about it. And so another assumption that is often made implicitly, not necessarily discussed, is that innovation should be done by those who are the most innovative, however we define that. And this we do often with the mechanisms in which we support innovation. And this has led to what academics have called the regional innovation paradox, which is something that anyone who has thought about innovation in rural areas has come across, which is the fact that if we have funds that require us to apply to and show our competencies in innovation, then those areas who have the most innovation will then receive the most support. Because the areas that have the least tradition of innovation, have the least prior experience, the networks, the connections, the know-how of how to do innovation, they are then going to get the least support. And there may be a case for let's support those that are the most competitive or the most competent in doing innovation. But is that always the best way? So one way to criticize that position is a moral one. Shouldn't everyone be allowed to do innovation? You know, what about us in the East or the West or the North? But even from the point of view of opportunities for the society as a whole, we can perhaps wonder whether it is precisely those places who are not experienced with innovation, who don't know how to make a brilliant application, who don't have all the collaborative partners. Maybe this is where there are underexplored opportunities, where there are resources, or there is know-how, there is culture, which could be used for innovation, but isn't being used for it. And the money isn't flowing there because we have defined the preconditions for doing innovation as being already good at it. Okay, so looking at how these assumptions, these ways of thinking about innovation materialize in practice. This is not going to be a deep dive. I'm going to take a few examples of this. And One of the principal instruments that the Icelandic state uses to support innovation is the Technology Development Fund. This is the grown-up money for a startup, for an innovative company. This is the 60 million or something like that. And I've looked at some of the criteria that the Technology Development Fund puts forward. Now, we may agree or disagree with them. This may be a good way or a bad way to do support for innovation. But I do want to highlight the assumptions that are behind it. And so if you look at the criteria for what gets funded from the Technology Development Fund, you will see that there are principally three categories: novelty, impact, and execution. And I have cherry-picked here. I have taken some points out of it. I didn't show you the whole document, so just be mindful of that. So what is the definition of new that the Technology Development Fund uses? The biggest score for an application to the Technology Development Fund is that what is being applied for meets a new and previously unmet need globally. And so remember that Kodak's digital camera would definitely have met a new and previously unmet need globally in the 70s. But if you are in a rural area where what you're doing is you're taking something that is not necessarily new in the world, but you're figuring out a way to make it work in your context, almost certainly your application will not get a high score in novelty there. So novelty here is introduced as a new thing or process, not necessarily figuring out how to use something in a new context. Okay, so the second one is impact. So there's a little bit of ambiguity here, but the greatest score for the Tech Development Fund is something that has great potential for turnover/value to be expected from a product on the market. And so you need to be doing something that has a monetary return, that is, has an exchange value on the market. There are some footnotes that, if it saves money for Icelandic users or something like that, it can be still getting a high score and impact. But it is very much geared towards economic value. So that is the assumption about innovation that is made there in that fund. And execution. The value of collaboration for the project and participants is high. Now, this is, and that bit is part of it. There are many other criteria for execution. By the way, I've just picked that one. But let's look at that one. How easy it is if you are in Raufarhöfn to find collaboration for the project that has a high value for it, versus if you are in Vesturbær. Clearly, this is geared towards communities and people who are already connected, who already have access to stakeholders, to networks. So whether we like it or not, it may be a good idea or not, we are thinking about innovation in a certain way here. All right, so kind of quickly, the main way in which the government now supports innovation and which has grown tremendously is not actually through the Tech Development Fund or through competitive grant allocation, but it's through the so-called tax incentives, where a significant part of the investment in research and development that companies make is paid back from the government. And obviously, this is also, and by the way, just to highlight, this has grown tremendously and is huge amounts of money now that goes through to the private sector through this. And so this is obviously thinking about innovation in a certain way, whether that's explained somewhere or debated somewhere or something like that. So in order to get this money from the government, you will already have to have a lot of money to spend. And this money cannot come from public sources. So how do you get money to spend on research and development? Well, you have someone who is able and interested to invest in you to get their money back. So this is clearly a scheme that aims at supporting those who are big to become bigger. This is clearly a scheme that assumes that innovation has a monetary value. It's clearly a scheme that aims at those who have access to venture capital and so forth. So very much thinking about innovation in a specific way. Finally, just to look at our kind of perspective from the point of rural areas, my favorite policy instrument is the uppbyggingarsjóðir landshlutanna, the regional development funds. And I really like them. I like them because they don't make always so many assumptions about how innovation is. They can support a broad range of different types of innovation or social initiatives. The problem is that they're microscopic. Frequently, an entire region has to split between them money for innovation through the regional development funds that is equivalent to what one company gets out of one grant application to the Technology Development Fund, and not to speak of the tax breaks for research and development. The regional development funds are micro grants, regrettably. And they also usually are attached to a policy document for the specific region that they're in. And almost always there is an incentive to create jobs, to look at the strengths and weaknesses of that particular region and to solve local challenges. So this is a certain way of thinking about innovation. I personally enjoy thinking about innovation more like the regional development funds, but I do think also they sometimes have too much of a narrow idea of innovation, specifically in this push to create jobs or think about your own strengths and weaknesses. All right, so tying the knot on this with us, Magdalena talked about finding the true meaning of the buzzwords. And I guess what I'm going to invite you to do, if you have time to stick around and chat after this, is to think with me about what could be the true understanding of words like innovation. What could we think of when we think of innovation? We could think that innovation requires not just the demand to create value, but a conversation on values. Whether we have the conversation or not, innovation proceeds with a certain definition of value. And perhaps we would be better off if there was a conversation. Values meaning what is valuable to us as individuals, as a society, as a community, as a nation. What are our values? Where do we want to head towards? We could think that innovation is something that entails the transformation of the whole of society, remembering that Kodak couldn't make a digital camera as a box in and of itself. For digital cameras to exist and be used in society, there were thousands of different transformations that needed to happen: social habits, infrastructure, policies, and so forth. So the process of innovation is always a process of a collective transformation. We could think that innovation is carried out by diverse actors, from the women's organizations, even through trade unions, to what the government is doing, the education system. This is all a part of the innovative process. It is not contained by a businessman or a particular type of an entrepreneur or something like that. We could acknowledge that innovation eliminates jobs and requires a conversation of where the value goes to. We should acknowledge that innovation operates globally and it can turn weaknesses into strengths. And to not fall into what I sometimes perceive as the trap of the regional policy documents attached to the regional development funds, to be too narrowly looking at your own region as a starting point for innovation. And so maybe innovation should be thought of a little bit like the books, the pages of What People Do All Day by Richard Scarry, sort of like a collection of all kinds of people doing all kinds of things that emerges as something when you glance through it, but then you kind of have to look at each figure, each activity, each thing, and trying to kind of see how this whole thing is emerging towards. And we might want to think about different ways of supporting innovation with that framing in mind. We do accelerators that in the original configuration are about creating economic value very fast, and either dying very fast or scaling 10x and ideally becoming a unicorn. But maybe we need to be looking into making decelerators that slow us down and make us think about the values that we embody when we create our things. We could be exploring generators. We could be exploring ways to start with a specific social challenge and then try to solve that and then come up with companies that then can generate economic value. We could work in missions like Mariana Mazzucato, who visited Iceland last week, has talked about. We could be thinking of how the government can coordinate society, remembering from the Kodak example that innovation requires the whole of society to move in unison, or at least in some sort of collaborative way. How the government can actually steer us in directions of solving social challenges. We could acknowledge that the commons, that the Christmas cat that nobody pays for seeing in the square in downtown Reykjavik is also value creating. And often this is the easiest way to create value. And we could be thinking more of communities rather than companies or formal entities when we support innovation. We can think differently about it. We can move our moonshots into the hometowns. And we have to acknowledge that not having a conversation about it is also a decision. Not thinking about towards what kind of a world are we trying to move when we support innovation does not mean that we are not making assumptions, does not mean that we are not being political. It just means that we're not talking about it. It just means that we haven't invited for a conversation. So with these rude words that innovation is political, that I understand why it might trigger some people, we should ask these questions and we should debate the consequences of them, and we should make it problematic to think about innovation. It shouldn't be just like a support for the national team where we all come together and applaud the handball team. We shouldn't be applauding the new unicorns. We should be having debates where we have real differences and real different values about how we are going to build innovation and the economies and the societies of the future. That was the end of my presentation. I hope I have given you the true meaning of the words.
Thank you, Arnar. That was very inspiring, as always. Should we just open the floor for discussion and questions? Well, I definitely have something to say because, I mean, Arnar, we spent 2 years on asking these questions. What is innovation? How can we foster rural innovation ecosystems? And I feel like, I think this was in 2022, right? When we stopped with the project. And I feel some things have changed. Like, I feel like, I don't think that we have so many answers to be able to answer these questions, but I think more people are asking these questions, like how can we change our angle? How can we change our view on innovation? But what do you think has to change? Because this Uppbyggingarsjóður, for example, is a nice attempt, but I feel like it's so difficult to say, but I feel like that the innovation policy plans, they all want this kind of diverse innovation where everybody can be part of it. But the only way to go there is, like you said, that you already need to have money, that you already need to be part of an innovation ecosystem. But how can we get the ones that are outside of the system and that do not have money? How can we get them in with what we have? I think there's still no answer to that question, right?
No, I mean, I tried to supply a few ideas in the end of kind of different approaches, and we could go into that. As you know, I have been going around and talking wherever somebody will listen, and sometimes I organize talks and stuff. It is almost never. And every time I talk, I try to say something that I know that not everybody agrees with.
Mm.
It is almost never the case that anyone stands up and says, "I don't agree with what you were saying."
Mm-hmm.
There is no conversation, and this is partially the codependency of a certain sector, that there is this mode of like, we are Icelandic innovation and we are happy with each other and we're supporting each other, and there should be nothing except sort of mutual support, which I see where that comes from, and I understand that we want solidarity, but there is very rarely conversation about that. I see that there is a question, and maybe now finally somebody's going to really
challenge,
stick me up with what I'm saying. Would you like to invite the person with a hand up to?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody should just start talking whenever there's a question. We, the floor is yours.
Hi. My question would be for now, and thanks for a informative conversation. When considering the meaning of prejudge, because I think with these, particularly with the grants that you were talking about, if the people that are judging these grants have a particular, don't really have a sense of what innovation really represents, then how do you suggest that we best address that, if that makes sense?
I think they have a sense for what innovation represents for them. And I think that the point that I want to make is not that people don't have a definition or an attitude or certain assumptions about innovation. They do. The technology development funds, the way that it is set up, is not some sort of naive, uninformed thing. It's like done by people who have studied things and stuff. But it is coming from a certain view of innovation and a certain view that isn't necessarily debated. And so yeah, I don't necessarily think that people don't have an idea of it. I just think that they are not necessarily talking about what the idea is or debating what it should be.
Murder has a question.
Yeah, because so like following up on that, because I've applied to a lot of the grants, I've taken part in the hackathons, and a lot of the definitions of the terms is, I would say, wildly different between the professionals. So I challenge that assumption that everybody at who is assessing the grants, like I would say that, yeah, they have their definitions. They might not be the same as ours, and they're definitely not the same as the ones that you were mentioning before, especially because we're also interacting with the Icelandic language, which uses different terminology. So it's a little bit like conversing with an LM, an AI. It will always get confused because it has multiple definitions for each terminology, because the correct terminology and then the cultural terminology is wildly different. Just like very few of us would agree exactly what a hackathon is, because that term simply does not have a full definition that can be applied in all cases. So that's the problem. But I agree with you, Arnar. I really want this to be in a specific format because, like, I work with AI and I tell it how to behave. I just can't do that with humans. And I'm always asking all the organizers and like, please give me the detailed information. And like just recently talking to an assessor for FRI grants, and he fully admits, like, the advisors we get in, we cannot determine how they look at innovation because we have multiple words for the different categories of innovation. And these are most often confused. Some people think innovation is simply a company. Any company is innovation. That is actually taught in the university, or has been taught in the University of Iceland, which I think is a complete failure of understanding the concept. So yeah, that was me challenging that.
Thank you.
Stefan, you have a comment?
Yeah, I was like, I've been researching social innovation in particular, and also the national strategy for innovation doesn't really mention any or very few factors or keywords in social innovation. So it's really kind of commercial oriented, and I agree with everything that has been said. But I also think that like the accelerators and the funds and everything is geared towards monetary refunds from innovation. But social innovation is often born by frustration with something. Frustration with something in the environment, lack of services, prejudice or something. So people are kind of creating something that responds to unmet need and aiming towards social impact. And social innovation is in a way always co-creative and participatory because it doesn't work otherwise. So I feel that while there are some kind of keywords and slogans in municipal policies or regional policies, we don't have them in national policies. So I think there needs to be a political discussion between regional, municipal, and state authorities, including actors, both within social innovation, regional, rural innovation, and this commercial innovation and technical innovation, where you kind of integrate the different perspectives. I think that's quite timely and needs to be done. And I think there's an opportunity now. I think we have a more kind of consensus and awareness of the importance of social factors and social discussions and the threats of, this polarization and this kind of negative and deconstructive discourse that is going on in the community. But it's just an input.
Thank you. Ásta Olga also has a question or a comment.
Thank you. And yeah, I just couldn't find that icon.
No worries.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Arnar, and interesting questions and comments here. I'm at the university at the Office of Innovation, where we try to give support, and we run one accelerator called Snjallræði, which is supposed to be also a little bit different from the other typical accelerators, where we emphasize more research-based innovation. So I just want to do, I'm rather new in this, and I'm also running one project that has to do with innovation in rural areas. So I've spoken to Arnar about that, but I'm interested in like the terminology that we're now using if we're trying to influence change also in the grant system, and because there are a lot of changes currently being done there in a frumvarp, for example, and the skattafrádráttur Arnar mentioned, it's all being revised. So how, okay, there's social innovation, then I just noticed now impact innovation is being used as the new buzzword, or what does that really mean? Okay, Arnar, you talked about impact in the Ranni's criteria. Their impact is business impact. That's the category where they use impact. But when you talk about impact innovation, then that's often what you're talking about. How does it impact the society? So what is then? There is user innovation, like more, which focuses more on co-creation and innovating for your own need somehow. And research-based innovation. I just want to, if you can reflect a little bit on these terminologies, if they are helpful or if they are also just, again, simplifying and preventing the debate that you are asking for. And I really hope we will continue this a lot in the Innovation Week. And so, thanks.
Yeah,
Also, sorry, there was one more thing, because you talked about job elimination. So, I would like to, because in rural areas, like job creation or some kind of optimism of being active in the community, for me that has a lot to do with job creation, but maybe it's a twist on job creation, job elimination. So, sorry, I twisted lots of things maybe.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, so I'd like to respond to a few of the comments and questions. I am not trying to be a nerd about terminology. It's not that I am mad that people are using the words wrongly. I'm sort of more saying, the clip I played for you where it was all like innovation, change the world, innovation, let's be innovative. That is what I'm sort of trying to get us to not do, and to talk about not just creating value, but what are our values. And I am I'm interested in terminology like social innovation that Stefania brought up, and I think work that organizations like Einur are doing to push for social innovation are incredibly important. I don't, and I'm not trying to discourage that. I have my own sort of discomfort with that word, and I can try to explain what it is. I think we're all going in the same direction, and we might have different paths to it. In the last innovation policy, the main slogan was that innovation is a way not just for economic progress, but to solve societal challenges. And that sounds nice, but my main discomfort, speaking of economic value, is what kind of a world is it where economic progress and societal challenges are separate things? Shouldn't the definition of economic progress be something that meets human needs? So perhaps I am being too greedy, perhaps I am being too much of an idealist, but I think all innovation or entrepreneurship, whatever motivation it takes, are having impact on society and are changing the world around us. And so it's more that I like that we can carve out space for different ways of thinking about innovation with terms like social innovation. But I don't want to be in a space. I don't want to be in a corner of, okay, social innovation is here. I can tell that Stefania might have a different view on this, but you know, like that is what I'm concerned about. It's like, okay, let's put a box here and you're in a box. Ásta mentioned snjallræði. You know, it's gone through a lot of changes, but I know that. So, you know, Facebook is affecting severely our society, and it is developed and innovated with certain values in mind and certain, you know, circumstances. And you know, I think that the main thing that we think of as innovation needs to change. So Ásta, yeah, I forgot if you had a specific question, but
no, it was just like, does this term, like you say, it puts us in a corner if we start using it. My concern was a little bit when I got involved now here at the university that social innovation was being replaced with impact innovation, and then like, okay, and what does that really mean, and where does that now take us?
Yeah.
So it's like I agree with you. I think this terminology can sometimes just make it more blurry, and like you say, corner that type of innovation where we would want to influence maybe all innovation to go in a different, or
yeah. So
focus.
You know, I want to encourage you to check out Mariana Mazzucato on this. This is maybe one of her more kind of complicated points, but we often have like this opposites of, you know, market versus society. And what she explains, and I think she's right about it, is that, you know, markets are something that society creates, right? And so what is successful on the market, what generates economic results, is to a large extent what we as a society have decided that the markets should do. So posing them as opposite is, I don't know, always know if that is helpful. So again, like the economy is not, and the market is not outside our value-based system. It's not outside of what we make it to be. So I would like an economy that is, whose end result is to meet needs, if that makes sense. I think there's Simone and also Stefania probably wants to.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond quickly also to what Ásta said, because I mean, I think social innovation is like it's also about who is doing innovation. It's like you have this distinction between public innovation, social innovation, and technical innovation or commercial innovation. And so when we're talking about social innovation, we are talking about the social sector. We are talking about the people that are working there as well. It can be individual, it can be companies, it can be association or félög. And the definition of social innovation is that it is impact driven. It's social impact driven. It's not based on income or profits. And it's participatory, which kind of lays the foundation that it has to be, has to have like user perspective. It has to be user driven. At least that's why what is usually discussed. So both user innovation and impact innovation are kind of included or integrated in the concept and discourse on social innovation. So that was my input.
There are two more comments, Simone and Molly, and then we are done with our time. So maybe Simone, you go ahead.
Right. So yeah, it was very interesting because I realized how limited my personal definition of innovation was, and especially also after this discussion, like maybe like what is it exactly? I feel like it would be so nice to have like almost like a grid work, like you can have instead of sort of being a yes/no question, is like how many boxes do you tick that are part of innovation to make it sort of like like a gradient, like some might have more impact and some might have less impact. That also, like what Stefania was saying, like depending on who's the supplier or who's the participant. Yeah, I mean, it's different if we're talking about technical innovation versus social innovation. And in a way, everything that hasn't been done before, in my mind, would fall under innovation. But my understanding now that even if it hasn't been done before, it's not necessarily innovation. So I would feel like really, I mean, not that in a way, it doesn't matter so much if you come from, working on a plan, but it's more like, yeah, if you are an organization saying like, okay, you can and you cannot, apply to the innovation funds, then of course it does matter. But I think it's interesting anyway, because it would provide sort of an insight. Okay, what is the social impact of me? What is the community impact? What is the technological impact? You could sort of play with it and see also like how impactful, how much of an impact innovation it can be. Yeah, that just goes in my mind. Sorry, I don't know. Maybe something exists like that, like a grid or yeah.
Thank you, Simone. Murray, do you want to have the final question or comment?
Ooh, pressure from the final. But yeah, so actually just building on what Simone and Arthur were mentioning, because Simone like admitted like her definition of innovation is not the same as this, and mentioned this grid suggestion, which is like literally exactly what I work with. And I think that also can help us find a solution, because we have AI, and like if we make these into AI supported structures for administrators, for innovators, then we could be using the good determinations of these words, and then we could be communicating with shared understanding. So there's often been attempts, like the EU has like these huge terminology documents, and that's why I like working with them, and why it's easier for me to apply for EU funding than Icelandic funding, because of the understanding of the terminology. And I kind of see the AI capacity as kind of a bridge between us all, so that we can actually use the same terms. Like I led permaculture education, and permaculture is now a term that means basically nothing, because there's so many different views on what the word means, and then people use it incorrectly, which means that the conversation is almost impossible, which makes me very sad. So that's also why I'm so passionate on the topic. Yeah, I'm just hoping that creates more conversation or trainers of thought, rather than limiting. Oh, also because Arnar, you mentioned the boxes, that saying like, oh, I'm in impact innovation puts me in a box. I would agree that it puts people in a box, but I also define myself by 40 of those boxes. And I think it's very good to define that. And the problem is when the governmental entities put us in a box and think, oh, he's in environmental innovation, and that is all. It needs to be understood that no one is only in one. We're always kind of literally like your brilliant platform, Arnar. Like the connections you made between all the different topics and how the solutions connect to the problems, and like that, exactly that, like is the solution, I believe.
Thank you. I must say I like this metaphor with the boxes a lot, because I think we are still too much stuck in different boxes, and the overall challenge probably is to find paths through these boxes and also get the people in that are not part of any box yet. So we kind of have a whole entity or something. Arna, do you want to add something in the end?
Yeah, no, yeah. If I'm allowed to just summarize, some of the points, I think that we are always operating on some sort of definition of innovation, whether we are doing it explicitly or not. So it is not that people don't have an understanding of it. They have a certain understanding of it. They just don't necessarily talk about it. We are having an impact, whether we explicitly say that our aim is to have an impact or not. If we are just chasing economic growth, we are still having an impact. We have seen the social impact of Meta or the tech platforms. They have an impact. We claim there to be market-driven innovation, and in the Icelandic example, we have, for instance, the quota system, the privatization of the fishing rights, which is supposed to be a market-driven innovation. But what had to happen for that to happen? Well, there had to be a tremendous amount of public innovation to create the entire quota system and create new laws and paradigms around that from the state for that market to exist. So whichever adjective or box we use, we are always creating some sort of value for some sort of people under some sort of a value system. We won't escape that. And so value and novelty is the how you understand value and how you understand new is your definition of innovation. As a final thought. So that's why I like the ISO definition so much. I think it encompasses all of them, but it doesn't answer for us what our values are. It doesn't answer for us what is new to us. Those are up to us to do.
Yeah, it also doesn't put us so much in a box. I agree. Thank you so much, Arna. Thank you for this keynote today, and I think we just wrap it up. Whoever wants the recordings, just send me a line and we are happy to share the recordings with you, and have a beautiful rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.